The negative things, the failures, are something that I value maybe even more than the successes, because the failures 100% led to some kind of increased clarity or my ability to remove something that was negative in my life. Or a lot of times, maybe every time, when you're in a tight spot, you have to figure a way out of it. Hey folks, Ashley Garner here. So, we make a lot of videos about the nuts and bolts or the techniques of real estate and real estate investing. And everybody likes to post videos on what they've succeeded at, or they made all this money or achieved all these returns and things. But I think we all know in life that the successes are probably far less frequent than the failures. And I know that's very true in my life. There'll be lots of videos if I had to make a video on all of the failures of my life, or it would be one really, really long video. So I just thought I would bring that up in the interest of being transparent and kind of identifying with and empathizing with everybody. And negative things, the failures, are something that I value maybe even more than the successes, because the failures 100% led to some kind of increased clarity or my ability to remove something that was negative in my life. Or a lot of times, maybe every time, when you're in a tight spot, you have to figure a way out of it. You can either quit, which is never ever the best option, or you keep going. And in order to keep going, you got to get out of the tight spot. Well, you have to figure it out. And that's where I think you really can show your true abilities and your true worth. If you have no other choice and you have to figure it out, then you learn a new way, or you make a new relationship, or you try a new technique, or whatever. And those are the things that I value the most. As I think back on my career, my life, not just business stuff, but a lot of times business stuff. And again, I can make lots of videos, and I might do that, because I've been through bankruptcies and short sales and foreclosures and not having enough money to make payroll, and living on a credit card, praying for the next payable to come in, the receivable to come in. And those are not fun places to be. But looking back, had I not been in them, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have learned what I learned then. And I think that's important, because this fear of having, up keeps us from taking the next step. It keeps us from learning. It keeps us from a new adventure in life or a new success in life, because we just don't try it if we're afraid of messing up. And I will say that you will mess up, and I'm sure I will mess up again, and I'm sure I won't like it when I'm in the tight spot, but I know for sure that I won't quit. I'll keep going. I'll figure it out somehow. And I think that's important. Don't just sit on the sideline and wait for everything. Say, okay, there's no possible way I can make a mistake here. If you wait on that, guess what? You'll be sitting on the sidelines probably forever. You may not make that big mistake, but you probably won't make any big successes either. One time I remember, and this turned out to be one of my favorite deals. I remember this feeling so vividly. It was probably 20 years ago, I'd say. And it was in one of those phases of my life that, as I look back on, was like a big transitional change for me. From one aspect of business to another, I was moving, I was getting ready to get married. There were all kinds of these big life things going on. And I was coming from a business deal that turned out not to be very good. We worked hard, didn't quit, tried for years and years to figure it out. And ultimately, it just was a bad deal. And there was just no way out. So it turns out we end up owing the bank a whole bunch of money. And the piece of real estate simply wasn't worth what we owed the bank. We were upside down. You hear that term a lot. So we're upside down on this thing. And it goes into the special assets section of the bank, the real estate owned REO department. And this is a whole different set of people, than the people that you see when you walk into the bank in the downtown branch. Of course, nowadays you don't even go to the bank. It's all online. But back then, you actually went into the bank and you sat down with the loan officer and you did business. And the REO folks are a whole different ball of wax. They're here to try to figure out this problem. They tend to be, I don't know, I kind of found them to be kind of creative problem solvers. They had to figure out, what do I do with this mess? How do I fix it? And so that was the first time that that I personally, and I'd read about these things and I'd heard about them, but it was the first time that I personally got to deal with that section of the bank. And, I begged, I pleaded, they don't want to hear any of that. It's all numbers to them. And again, this piece of real estate wasn't worth what we owed the bank. So long story short, it came around that I said, okay, well, let me buy this note from you. Okay. So, we had it in an LLC, and I say, all right, bank, let me buy this debt from you. So we negotiated a price for me to buy the debt, and it was less than what we owed. So they had to write it down, or they had to reduce the amount that we owed. They had to eat the loss, right? So the difference between what I paid them and what we owed them, the bank had to just eat this and say, all right, that's a loss. We're never getting that. And we just write it off. And by the way, I don't feel too sorry for banks because they don't lose much money, if you've ever noticed. But this that I bought, I paid them cash money for this. Well, guess what? I didn't have any money. So I negotiated the deal, didn't have any money, found the money, and I'm preparing it to, I got the money here. I'm ready to give it to the bank. So now I say, well, how am I going to pay back these folks that I got the money from, right? So now I've got a deal cut with the bank that can get me out of a little bit of trouble there. But now I owe the people that I got the money from to buy the note. So, all right, I got half my problem solved, but now I still have another problem, right? Still owe this amount of money. So it turns out that I say, okay, well, I'm still the owner of record of this real estate. So I'm going to go find a buyer for it. So I dig around and I find a buyer for the real estate. So now I've got all the pieces here, and now everything's got to line up just right. And this was months and months of stress and negotiating and attorneys. The attorney's fees were huge. So all this happens on the same day, by the way. Fast forward several months, lots of stress. This was back before I had any gray hair. And so I closed the deal to buy the note. I closed the deal to sell the piece of real estate. I sell the piece of real estate for a substantial sum of money more than I bought the note for. So I sold the real estate, got the pile of money. I gave the portion to the folks that I borrowed the money from to buy the note, paid them, and then I was left with a pile of money. So this was mind-blowing to me, right? So now I go from, if this is even, I was way negative. And I go not only back to even, I actually come out ahead. And so the net gain that I put together was this huge thing, right? It left me with a relatively smaller portion of money increase. But the point is, I proved to myself that there's a way to figure this out. I didn't quit. I kept going, and I learned something new that was really a big deal. Now, I know there's books, there's lots of people out there that have made millions and millions of dollars doing exactly what I just described. But for me, I'd never done it before. I'd read about it. Sounds pretty cool. But then when you do, it was just mind blowing. And I'll never forget, that was one of my favorite situations to be in, which is odd because it was also one of the most painful, stressful, agonizing, frustrating, all of the negative things. That was that phase of my life. And then when that deal closed on that day, I was so excited. I was like, yes, we did it. I did it. And I don't know that there was anybody around to hear me cheer. But if you'd have seen me out on the sidewalk, I was walking like this. I was so excited and so proud. And I have lots of situations like that. Again, I never would have been in if we didn't try. Certainly when we set out on that project, we didn't intend for it to end up that way. Not even close. We intended the exact opposite. But we got there. It was negative. We didn't quit. We figured a way out, and no one could ever take that away from me. I'll always have that here in my bag of tricks now. I hope I don't ever need to do it again. But maybe I can help someone else out of the situation, or maybe there are opportunities to buy things when other people get in this situation. I don't wish that on anybody, but it happens all the time. And really, this in September of 2025, it seems to me like the world is kind of headed the way of deals like that happening again, because a lot of things now, the values are less than people paid for them, in the pre-COVID to COVID era and a little bit post-COVID when everything was just exploding. People were paying big money for things, and now they maybe aren't as worth as much. The rents are down, the interest rates are higher. So a lot of those things are going to go back to the bank in the REO section, in the troubled assets section. And maybe the experiences that we gained in my own situation will help us as we go forward, buying some new opportunities. But anyway, I just thought I'd share. That's one of many, many, many tight spots that I have found myself in. You may call them failures, but really, I think they're the ultimate successes. If you quit, that's about the only thing that you can do wrong. You just can't quit. You just have to keep going. You have to figure it out. You have to persevere. And that's the message. So I'd love to hear it. If you've got any failures you want to talk about, I'd love to talk about it. If you've got one you're going through now and you can't figure out a way to get out of it, maybe we can talk about it and maybe we can brainstorm a way to get you out of it. There's usually a way. You may not know how to do it, but that doesn't mean there's not a way. You just have to figure out how to get it done. All right? See you.